This is MichMash, a weekly conversation where we try to unjumble an important and sometimes under-the-radar statewide story that affects you. I'm Cheyna Roth.
And I'm Zach Gorchow. A ballot initiative says it will ensure that non-citizens can't vote in Michigan elections. This initiative was launched in July.
Zach, I'm getting a sense of deja vu here. This is a recurring issue with Republicans, this concern that people who are not U.S. citizens are voting in elections. But give us some facts here.
So, Cheyna, in the 2024 election, a University of Michigan student who's a non-citizen from China voted. His vote was counted. The Secretary of State's office subsequently did a review after this controversial situation and found 15 more non-citizens who may have voted in the 2024 election.
And how many total votes is this out of?
About 5.7 million.
Okay, I'm not great with math, but that feels like a very inconsequential percentage of non-citizens voting. So why does this continue to be an issue?
The concern is the idea that citizens of another country could swing American elections. To be clear, there has never been evidence of this happening, but we should point out that a constant refrain every election cycle is that every vote matters. And we see smaller scale races for local offices or tax proposals decided by a few votes all the time. Election officials tell voters all the time their vote matters. Well, it's hard to then turn around and argue votes cast by ineligible voters don't matter.
One of the longstanding concerns with these types of initiatives is that it will make it harder for citizens to vote. Not everyone has easy access to something like a state-issued ID, though non-citizens can legally obtain a state driver's license and ID, provided they can provide a legal presence in Michigan.
So the proposal does seem to anticipate this concern. The proposal says the legislature would define what valid proof of citizenship is. It also requires the Secretary of State to check the voter roll and make sure non-citizens are not on it. We should point out this would mean a huge change in the voting process. Everyone would have to show ID when voting at the precincts. Currently, most voters do that, but some instead sign an affidavit attesting to their identity. And those applying for absentee ballots will now have to verify their identity when applying. These are big changes.
So, Zach, where is this proposal at and what are the next steps?
Advocates are currently in the process of collecting the signatures for ballot access. They need at least 446,198 valid signatures from registered voters by July of next year to qualify. That's a heavy lift, but there's a lot of organization behind it, including Michigan Republican Party leaders. If they succeed, voters will decide in November 2026.
All right, now that we've set the table on this issue, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we're going to talk to the leader of the group pursuing this proposal. And then stick around because we'll also be speaking with a leader of a group opposing it. We'll be right back. Joining us now is Paul Jacob with the Americans for Citizens Voting. That's the organization that is sort of leading the charge about this ballot initiative. Paul, welcome to MichMash.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
So, Paul, your organization is pursuing this constitutional amendment that could face voters in November of 2026. It already is illegal for non-citizens to vote in Michigan. So why are you bringing this forward as a ballot proposal? What's the goal here?
Well, this initiative does three things, and sometimes people get confused on whether non-citizens can vote or not vote. And you can say that it's illegal, but really what the reality is, they haven't been authorized to vote. But there's a real question about state constitutions because there are now 22 cities throughout the country that allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. Those have been challenged. And in one case in New York, the court ruled that no, our law is clear, only citizens can vote. But in Vermont and in California, courts came to a different conclusion, that it was all right to allow non-citizens to vote with the same basic language that Michigan has. So in the last several election cycles, we have worked in 14 states to put measures on the ballot that just clearly say only U.S. citizens are eligible to vote. We also have Texas will have a measure like that on the ballot this November. And 3 states, Arkansas, Kansas, and South Dakota, already have it on their ballot for next November. Michigan's proposal is a little bit different because not only does it make clear that only citizens can vote, but it also requires checking. It requires the Secretary of State to check the voter roll and determine whether people are citizens. And if she can't or he can't determine that, to contact them and give them a time period to show that they are citizens. And then the other measure in this proposal is voter ID, that you have to show ID to vote. If you don't, you get to the polls without that, you can cast a provisional ballot, but your ballot's not going to count unless you show voter ID.
The Secretary of State's office did a review of the 2024 election and found 16 instances of non-citizens voting, which is a very small percentage of the 5.7 million people that voted overall. So walk us through, given these sort of like very, very, very low instances of this happening, why is this a concern?
Well, first of all, I think we have to step back and realize that Secretary of State Benson said before the election that the voting rolls were clean. There were no non-citizens on those rolls. And then it turned out, yes, there were. And it was only after her statement saying there were no non-citizens voting. This was on Meet the Press on national television. It was only when the Chinese student did vote and tried to get his ballot back. The other aspect of this isn't something that the system in Michigan set up by the Secretary of State found the Chinese student, Chinese national voting. He went to get his ballot back. That's the only reason that anybody knew that he had cast it. And then after that, the Secretary of State made a very cursory check using driver's license information and found another 15. We think the Secretary of State could go much, much further in looking at the voter list, in checking with the list that Homeland Security has, other federal lists at the State Department, the lists they have for government benefits, and all of those are open to be checked. This measure would require her to do that. And of course, look, we have never said in any of the states we've worked in that, oh my goodness, non-citizens are deciding all the elections. That's not our position. Our position is that it's important that voters get to decide, should non-citizens be voting in our elections or not? I think voters are going to decide not. And then the other key thing is that we check that. We don't just say, gee, we found a few, but it's not that many, so let's let it just go on and on. Let's have a clear standard. Let's enforce that standard. And then we're going to have elections that I think people have a lot more confidence in. So that's the goal. We're not saying the sky is falling. We're just saying that this is a problem. And in fact, the more that we point out that, we're told there is no problem, then it turns out, oops, there is a problem. And then we're told, but it's just small. If it's a problem, let's solve it. That's all we're saying. And there is a way to solve it. We can check the list. And this initiative has measures that if someone's, hometown doesn't have the documentation, there's a process for that. We're looking to have every U.S. citizen in Michigan who wants to vote be able to vote. But we're also looking for non-citizens not to be put on the rolls and not to vote.
Can you address, Paul, the concerns from critics about the challenges for some people to get the ID that's going to be necessary, that it will disproportionately impact the poor? Is there any remedy for that in the proposal? And I think the broader question there is it worth rooting out maybe a couple dozen or more of non-citizens from the system when it could mean challenges or even blocking hundreds of thousands of legitimate people from voting?
I don't think this measure will block any legitimate voters from voting. We have a process now. You have to, to register to vote, you have to show who you are. And in terms of citizenship, I believe we're going to be able to check that roll. It's a one-time thing. The Secretary of State should be able to check these folks. If she can't or he can't determine that, then there is the process for them to go about showing that. In terms of the actual documentation, this measure allows people to get free ID. So there's no burden in that way. And the truth be told, I mean, when we're talking about ID, you can't adopt a kitten or a puppy in Michigan without showing an ID. You can't get on an airplane. When the COVID vaccine was out there, you could not get that vaccine unless you had an ID. And so, the truth is, providing free ID has an added benefit, which is people need an ID to be able to navigate the world we live in. So I think that this whole hair on fire, we can't possibly do this, people won't have the identification, married women change their names, no one will be able to figure that one out. And I can tell you, being married and my wife changing her name about 5 or 6 years after we got married, it is a hassle. It's not the sort of hassle that should cause us to throw up our arms and say, we're just going to have to let non-citizens vote. We can't check it. And I think, again, when we look at the number of non-citizens voting, if any folks are voting who aren't supposed to vote, we need to rectify that. But the other aspect of it is there hasn't been a diligent check. And there needs to be that check done. If it turns out that all that are found are 16 folks who shouldn't be on the list, and we fix that, then great. And that'll be great that the problem isn't bigger. But let's address it. People are concerned about this. We've already seen, after being promised it wasn't happening, that it is happening. And let's hope that it's small, but let's solve the problem.
So currently, the state allows for people who don't have their ID with them at the polls to sign an affidavit. What is wrong with that process? Why make them have to have it with them?
Well, because it turns out to not be voter ID. I mean, and let's go back to 2022. I remember ads on television that said voter ID was going to be etched into the Constitution, and that's why people should support Proposal 2. What Proposal 2 etched into the Constitution is that you never, ever have to show an ID in Michigan. All you have to do is sign a statement. Your ballot goes into the stack to be counted, whether that statement was accurate or not. There isn't any checking, and there isn't any way to get the ballot back, even if you found out that the person wasn't who they said they were. That's not voter ID, and it was a very dishonest campaign, millions of dollars behind it. Most of that money coming from the 1630 fund, who got most of their money from a Swiss billionaire. So it was actually foreign money campaigning in Michigan. We need a system in which you have some comfort that people are who they say they are. And so this measure will actually etch voter ID into the Constitution. If you don't have ID, you show up at the polls and you don't have that ID, you can cast a provisional ballot. And then you have 6 days after the election to come back and show your ID or to show whatever ID you have. So again, the system is designed to require people to show that ID. It's very permissive in case someone forgets it or there's some problem. But all over the world, in democratic countries, people show ID. And that is the common sense standard. It's only in the United States and in recent times that folks have decided to pretend that if someone just signs a statement that we don't ever check, that's good enough. I think the people of Michigan are going to say that's not good enough, and that they need the citizen-only voting amendment to make certain that people are showing that they are who they say they are.
You're collecting signatures now. What's your timetable for turning them in? And how do you address what your critics are saying that some of your circulators are mischaracterizing this proposal?
Well, I think this proposal, which 80% of the people in the polls that we've taken support, is the easiest petition signature that I think anybody has ever collected. So I don't know why anybody would say anything other than the truth. We have hired some people to collect signatures, and we are very clear with them that if they are found to say anything that's not truthful, they are going to be fired. We take it very seriously that people tell what this proposal does And we think that 80% of the people in Michigan would sign it. In fact, maybe more than 80%, because some people are going to say, I want to vote on it, whether I support it now or not, whether I've made a decision yet or not. We're doing very well in getting signatures. I believe this is going to be on the 2026 ballot. We expect to be challenged by, a lot of different interest groups and attorneys. We don't have any friends in the Secretary of State's office or the AG's office. So we're fully expecting folks to come at us in every way possible. But we're going to get the signatures, and we are adamant that the people of Michigan ought to get a vote on this proposal. And if they do, we think it'll win.
Okay. Paul, Jacob, thank you so much for joining us here on MichMash.
My pleasure. If people want more information or to get petitions, they can go to MichCOV, Mich for Michigan, the old one, the old abbreviation, and COV for citizenonlyvoting.com, MichCOV.com. Thanks a lot.
We're going to take one more quick break, but when we come back, we're going to be joined by Melinda Billingsley with Voters Not Politicians.
Joining us now is Melinda Billingsley. She's with the group Voters Not Politicians. That's the organization that led the changes to redistricting in Michigan in 2018 and now works to broaden voter access. Melinda, welcome to MichMash.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Melinda, your organization has stepped up to oppose the Americans for Citizens Voting proposal. Why is that?
Well, to put it very simply, Voters Not Politicians is a pro-democracy organization, and the petition that is being put forward is anti-democracy and anti-voter. So we are opposing it. We are describing these petitions as voter suppression. What they're really going to do is just make it harder for every single voter in Michigan to register to vote and to access their ballot. And we know from how people showed out in 2018 and 2022 that Michiganders across the political spectrum really support access to voting rights. They like the election system that we currently have in place, and they don't believe in making it harder for people to vote. So that is why we're raising the alarm and making sure that people are aware of what this petition really is and how it will affect everybody's right to vote.
Does Voters Not Politicians see a problem with non-citizens potentially and actually voting in Michigan elections?
Well, no. First and foremost, because that's already illegal. That is already against state and federal law. Non-citizens are not allowed to vote in Michigan elections. And we really have some impressive systems to prevent that. So in 2023, I have to think about it, the Michigan legislature passed secure automatic voter registration that really just adds new guardrails to our voter registration process while also making the process more accessible to people. And along with that, we have the policies that have been set in place by the Secretary of State's office, by the Department of Elections, to be constantly checking and reviewing our elections to make sure that our elections are secure. And what we have seen as a result is that we have a record voter turnout in the last several election cycles. And as millions and millions of people are voting, we don't have widespread voter fraud or widespread non-citizens voting election. Like, that's just not a thing. So we don't see a problem with it because the problem doesn't exist. There is a problem with the proposals being put forward by these petitions because they would actually make voting harder for everyone.
So what do you say to those that argue having 16 non-citizens voting in the 2024 election disenfranchises legal voters?
I would say that forcing voters to show up in person to their clerk's office with documentary proof of citizenship is going to disenfranchise many, many more eligible Michigan citizens. You know, there are so many folks who will be affected by this. Folks whose birth certificates do not match their current legal name, including married women who have changed their name. You have rural voters who cannot easily access their clerk's office in person, seniors, folks with disabilities, basically anyone who does not have easy access to transportation and a U.S. passport is going to be majorly inconvenienced by these petitions and this policy, which is much worse than 16 non-citizens who potentially voted in a previous election. And again, we have systems in place to catch and prosecute anyone who abuses our election systems and votes inappropriately. And we should let those systems continue to do their job and work, because they are clearly working. They are finding these people.
So the advocates of this proposal would point to the situation in Ann Arbor where a non-citizen did cast a vote illegally, but was only caught because he turned himself in afterward, and then they couldn't pull the ballot out. It was still counted. It seems like that wasn't a case where this would get caught, that it did slip through. What about circumstances like that?
So to be clear, that individual, allegedly, because of course that prosecution did not move forward, they, I believe, left the country. That individual basically lied on their registration forms when they said that they were a U.S. citizen. But I think it's really important to look at the bigger picture here, which is, it sounds like the proponents are saying that because of a single teenager in Ann Arbor, every single voter in Michigan should have their lives made harder, and we should risk disenfranchising tens of thousands of eligible citizens in Michigan because of the actions of a single teenager in Ann Arbor. And I think if we made all laws in Michigan based on the actions of teenagers in Ann Arbor, it would look like a very different state, and we would all face a lot more restrictions. And that's not the freedom that people in Michigan want.
What is your organization doing to work against this proposal?
So we're doing all of the things all of the time. So really what it comes down to is education and voter education. What we see with this proposal is that there are a lot of paid circulators who are out just doing whatever it takes to get signatures, including misleading the public. We have had reports of circulators saying things like, this will institute a voter ID law in Michigan. Voter ID is already the law in Michigan. We have had circulators saying, this will make it so folks who don't have ID can get free ID. There is already a hardship ID law in Michigan, and that process does exist. It's just really hard to access, and this doesn't make it any easier. I had a circulator for Americans for Citizens Voting tell me this is a petition to amend the United States Constitution so that it will have voter ID laws like we have in Michigan. And I asked him multiple times. I was like, that doesn't sound right. Are you sure? Are you sure? Yes, that's what this is for. So it's very clear that the circulators who are out right now are willing to mislead in order to get their signatures. That's their only goal. So what we really need to do is educate voters about what this policy will actually do, and make sure voters know that they need to read these petitions before they sign. Because when you read the summary, it makes it very clear what this petition is about and how it will inconvenience and negatively impact every single voter in Michigan.
You referenced the proposals from 2018 and 2022 that broadened the voting franchise in Michigan quite a bit. No reason absentee voting, same-day registration, the drop boxes, and many more things that are too many to count here. I'm wondering, has Michigan maybe gone too far? You know, I wonder sometimes with the same-day voter registration, now with the 9 days of early voting, and the burden that does put on the clerks to verify identity day of, especially in some of these college towns, that are some of these things maybe too much for the system to handle?
You know, I will say that when we look at the national level, Michigan is stand out among academics and democracy researchers for being pro-democracy. Like, we are a leader in democracy reform and having elections that are accessible to the public, because that is what it takes to have democracy work. People have to actually be able to participate in their democracy. I worked as a poll challenger, basically an observer in Macomb County for the 2024 election. I did a couple of shifts in Macomb, and the number of people I heard say, this is so great, being able to do early voting, being able to come in and get voting done. It's very clear not just from the numbers of people who voted in favor of these proposals, but from those who have taken advantage of these new rights and this new ballot access, that this is what Michiganders want. So while it does make a clerk's job a little bit more difficult, I will fully acknowledge that, it's still really important that voters have the access that they need to be able to exercise their constitutional right to vote. So does it make the clerk's job a little bit more difficult? Yes. But clerks are meeting that moment. They are doing a great job of being able to still provide secure elections while making them accessible as voters chose to do. That's what's most important here, is that these policies respect the voter's voice. Michigan voters came out in 2018, 2022. They passed these reforms. This is what they wanted. So it's important to make sure that they are in place and they continue to stay in place and aren't undermined by a national special interest group who comes in and says, we don't like how you do your elections.
When you look at the proposal from Americans for Citizens Voting, what stands out as the greatest concerns? And what about requiring ID and ending the ability to sign an affidavit of identity instead?
So definitely the greatest concern to me is if you look at the timeline, and this is right there in the 100-word summary, that these citizenship requirements would be in place for the 2027 general election, which means that every single voter who wants to vote in these elections in 2027, which are most municipal elections, would need to go in person to prove their citizenship. That is a really tight timeline, a very quick turnaround for the kind of voter education that we would need to put in place so that people know about this. What you're more likely to see is people showing up on election day to vote, not realizing they are not able to vote because they need to prove their citizenship, being turned away at the polls, being said, you need to go home and get a birth certificate. You need to bring back a passport. If you are married and have changed your name, you need to go find your birth certificate and your marriage license and then come back before 8 p.m. Oh, by the way, you also have to pick up your kids and also make dinner and also do these things. We will see people just being turned away and not voting. That is the biggest concern, because this will impact every single voter, and every voter will have to prove their citizenship.
Well, Melinda, thanks so much for joining us on MichMash. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for letting me come on and talk about this.